we're all going to face different levels of adversity. I unfortunately have had some major heart issues. I've suffered two heart attacks, and you have two choices. You can let it beat you, or you can keep moving forward and try and overcome it. And I decided that if the universe was going to take me, they're going to have to come a lot harder than clogging an artery or two. So I've seen people that have been handicapped by adversity and they just can't face it, they can't overcome it. Some people can't get out of bed, but you have the ability to overcome anything you're presented. And if you didn't do so successfully, the universe is going to do it again.
How does one overcome every day when you got a lot of stuff on your plate and you feel like life has been so hard, so difficult for you, and it just feels like you? Welcome to another episode of the Disciplined Man podcast, where we talk about discipline, mindset, and the profound impact they have on manhood. We know manhood may not look the same for everyone, but real strength lies in authenticity and personal truth. So join us for another enriching conversation about how real men think, how we feel, and how we navigate the complexities of modern masculinity. Now, today's guest, I don't know if you've ever tried to sell anything, but for those of us who have, you understand that there's a certain level of resilience, tenacity, and will to face adversity that you have to have. Now, this gentleman happens to be a commercial real estate broker and investor with over 1,500 transactions and $6.5 billion, yes, $6.5 billion in sales volume, and somebody who I believe represents everything that this podcast stands for as far as discipline and understanding the power of your mindset. So with that being said, let me introduce you to Mr. Brandon Michaels. Brandon, welcome to the show, my friend.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I wouldn't have it any other way. So I understand a little bit from your background. You started off selling vegetables. Is that incorrect?
You know, when I graduated from college, I really wasn't sure what I was going to do. So funny story, I went to law school.
Oh, nice.
For 3 days.
Wow.
And realized that I didn't want to be a lawyer. So I went into the family business and ultimately started importing and selling cucumbers and tomatoes, brought them in from Mexico, sold them all over the country. So that's kind of where I started.
So walk me through what it takes a person to go from selling vegetables to actually getting into real estate.
A great question. You know, when I was younger, I was always so curious by those that were uber successful.
Yep.
And I would ask them, and there was always this common theme, like, what do you do? Like, oh, I do real estate. It was just a very common answer. So I felt this desire to go into the field of real estate, ended up going into commercial real estate and really didn't know anything about it, but knew that I had a desire to succeed and really was willing to do whatever it took to do so.
Yeah. And thinking about success, I mean, I've watched a ton of your stuff thus far as my research and understanding what you do. One of the things that you mentioned is that you don't want to just help people become better commercial real estate brokers because, you know, obviously, you know, there's a lot of people who understand in the industry who could possibly try to do that. They may not have as much success as you, but they could try to do that. But you also said you want to help people become successful individuals. So help me understand what that actually looks like for you.
You know, my philosophy is if you're a successful individual, if you're disciplined in your approach to each day, that will carry over to whatever field it is that you go into, whether it's real estate, whether it's selling shoelaces. It's who you are as an individual that carries over to what you do day in and day out.
Right. And I think another thing that I noticed that you mentioned, which I also believe, is that no one cares. Work harder. And my belief is understanding that I know I've been through some things. I believe everybody has a story. You have some things that you've gone through that, you know, you can say, woe is me about. But the reality is, regardless of what I was going through, whether it was out on bereavement or there was something I was having a challenge that presented to me that day, my car wasn't working. But nobody actually cares. You have to show up and do what you need to do anyway. So tell me about no one cares, work harder. What does that mean to you?
You know, it's a stark reality, and the sooner you can learn this as a man, I think the better off you're going to be. Bad things are going to happen to you. We're all going to deal with adversity at some point. Now, the level of adversity, that's going to be specific to each individual, but at some point you have to realize no one really cares what you're going through.
Right.
People ultimately care about themselves. And the sooner you can understand that no one really cares, and it's up to you as a man to continue pushing forward and to continue trying to achieve those things that you're trying to achieve, the sooner it is you're going to get to the other side, which is success.
Right. And what are, let's say, Actually, let's take a step back really quick, because another thing about just being in a position like you've been in sales for God knows how long at this point, and you've had a ton of success with everything that you've done. So, what are maybe some success strategies that you share with your people, or that you want to share with people to help them be more successful in whatever they're doing?
The biggest thing is to not think about yourself
Yeah.
and to take yourself out of the equation. If you want to be successful, especially in anything you do,
Right.
but in sales or whatever field you choose, you have to create value for the people that you are ultimately working for.
Right.
And if you can't create value and it's all about yourself, then you're not going to succeed. You have to take yourself out of the equation, find out what's important to the other person, and from there, formulate a plan to help them succeed. And that's how ultimately you'll succeed.
Yep. So I used to sell cars in, it was what, 2012. So I was full time in school, and I was working like 65 hours a week as a car salesman. And there's this thing that my general manager at the time shared with me. He said, "Have you ever heard of Whiffum?" I'm like, "Whiffum? What are you talking about?" No, I haven't. I've heard of Wi-Fi, but Whiffum was Whiffum. And so he explained it to me, obviously, which is what's in it for me.
Right.
And I think a lot of people, if you understand the background of what's in it for me, and you build relationships that way, it's going to help you succeed at an entirely different level. And I know you have a unique approach in terms of building relationships based on some of the things that you've shared. Can you walk me through, when you think about building relationships with people, and even from the sales side, exactly how you would suggest to somebody to actually do that?
I think listening is the most important skill that you can acquire, and asking questions, right? I focus on, and this is a interesting saying, but be interested, not interesting, right? People that are interesting, they're typically talking about themselves. People that are interested, they're interested in others. They want to learn about others, right? Like, I'm sitting here and I really want to ask you questions. I want to learn like what you do and how you become so successful in this space, but be interested in the other person.
Yep.
Learn what their drivers are. Learn what's important to them. Ask them the right leading questions. And from there, you can create value for that individual. But most people, all they want to do is talk about themselves.
Yep.
You're going to sit down and talk about yourself. You're going to go sell a car, right?
Yep.
I show up and I want to buy a car, and you're going to tell me, well, this car has this and this. You don't know what kind of car I like. You don't know what my drivers are. You don't know what color I want. You don't know what's important to me. If you could figure that out as a car salesman, and then in turn give me what I'm looking for, that's how you create value.
For sure. For sure. And I think back to, like, even during that time period of my life, I remember I used to like go from that 60 hours a week at the dealership, and I was doing stuff like this even at that point in time. And then I had friends who would say, "Hey man, did you go to work today?" I'm like, "Well, yeah, I did." And so they would kind of scurry away from me at that point, because their belief was that, like, if I worked that hard, then I probably wasn't the nicest person to talk to at that time. But I know for me, it's been so important to continue to do the work and continue to show up and continue to pretty much lead by example. And I believe, just from what I've seen as far as what you're doing and what you're building, that's what you continue to do. So can you tell me a little bit more about your story? Like, how does Brandon get here? What drives you today?
I don't really have the prettiest story. I think I just had a desire to accomplish these certain things that I see in my head, right?
Yep.
We all have these visions and ideals that we see in our heads, and that's a whole nother conversation if it's worthwhile to go after what we see. But
Yep.
I have certain things that I wanted to attain and go after, and that were important to me, and I was willing to make tremendous sacrifice
Yep.
in order to accomplish whatever it is. And mind you, I haven't accomplished anywhere near what it is that I'm set out to do.
Yep.
But it's just been now 2.5 decades of consistent effort and really working day in and day out continually, right?
Yep.
Being consistent day in and day out. And then the results, they come. But really the fun part is the journey. The fun
Yep.
part is going through the process. It's not the results. It's, I look back and I think, well, I remember the grind. I remember how hard it was at the beginning. And that actually was the fun part of the whole thing.
Yeah. So what was the hardest part in the beginning for you?
The beginning was a blur because it was just so much rejection and so much constant failure. But I just remember just showing up day in and day out and doing the things that I needed to do. But I was really focused on building a skill set, right? So most people, they
Yep.
go into a field, they're focused on money.
Yep.
Though I wanted to make money, because we all go to do something ultimately to earn income, I was more focused on building a skill set. I wanted to be able to sit down with individuals in my space. I'm dealing with, very successful, high-end individuals with high net worths. And I just wanted to be able to sit down and speak to them. I wanted to know how to interact. I wanted to know what questions to ask them. I wanted to be able to respond to their questions. And I was more focused on building that skill set than actually earning money. And in doing so, by building a skill set, ultimately the money does at some point follow.
Yeah, it's funny. Like that's how I operate. And my thought process is you're going to suck when you start. It doesn't matter what it is. You're going to suck. You could, be at a certain point in your fitness journey, and you walk in there, you start comparing yourself to everybody. But the reality is they've been in there 2 years, some people 20 years. I mean, I've been working out since I was a kid, and that's just something I've continued to maintain. But in the beginning, I sucked. And I also understood that sales is not a numbers game. It's a skills game. And when you continue working on your skill, that skill can be acquired. You just have to put in the time in order to make that happen. So what sort of things would you provide to say somebody who maybe sucks right now where they are, but you know that there's some things that they can achieve? What advice would you give them?
First off, I would advise them that they don't suck. The reality is when you started working out, we all start somewhere, right? So you go into the gym, you're training next to the individual that's using the lighter weight. They don't suck. It's just we all have to start at a certain level.
For sure.
When you go into sales and you start in sales, you don't suck. You're exactly where you need to be or supposed to be, because as a young person, let's say coming out of college, you don't know what it takes to be a successful salesperson. You don't know what it takes to be a millionaire. These are skills that you acquire. No one sits you down and teaches you these skills, right?
For sure.
So as a young person, I would recommend when you're going into your field of choice that you are willing to take the advice of others.
For sure.
Willing to put in the work and willing to understand that this is not a get rich quick type of scenario. Though that really doesn't exist. So it's putting in continual, consistent effort, but being focused on learning.
Right. And something you said here recently, you said motivation is BS. It requires discipline. Tell me more about that.
Well, I'm sure everyone you know is motivated, right?
Yep.
Everyone talks about the things that they want. There's not many things stick with me long term, but one thing stuck with me long term. At the time, I was listening to an individual speak, and he said there's a big difference between someone that wants to spend $1 million and someone that wants to earn $1 million. And to actually go out and earn it is a completely different process than wanting to spend it.
Mm-hmm. And thinking along those lines, I heard a little bit something that went about that you actually had a deal, a pretty significant deal that you made happen that day you trained legs. Help me understand the mentality that is required of somebody in order to do something like that and not over celebrating.
I've never been one to celebrate my victories. I've never been one and that's just me, I guess. But
yeah.
I feel that I have a job to do. I have certain expectations of what I want to accomplish, and this is what I'm supposed to be doing. Yeah. So I set out a task for myself, and not one deal is going to make or break anything. So it's continually moving forward and doing the things day in and day out that I think will make me better as an individual.
Yeah. And thinking about even like the stuff that you day in and day out, like what is it that you might want to share with somebody to say, hey, look, in order to build the proper foundation for yourself, I would start here. And once I build that foundation, I go to this next step. Can you walk me through what that might look like?
I would build a routine that's repeatable. Yeah. I think having a routine that you can do day in and day out, and then once you create that routine, you can start to add to it. Mm-hmm. But from what I've learned and what I've witnessed, those individuals that kind of do the same thing every day, they wake up at the same time, they eat at the same time, they go to bed at the same time. They're very regimented in their tasks and their day. And those people seem to be much more focused. They're much more organized. They're ultimately much more disciplined. Those are the people that I've seen achieve much higher levels of success than people that, I'm sure you have friends that they go to bed at all different times. They wake up, one day they're up at 6, one day they're up at 8, one day they're at 10. Like, no, that doesn't really work if you're trying to accomplish things.
For sure. So what does, and I'm going to ask you this question because I know there's a ton of people who go online and they can say anything, but you don't exactly know what that person
Sure.
might actually be doing in their time. So, what does a successful day or week look like for Brandon?
I do the same thing every single day. It's not very glamorous. It's not very exciting. I wake up at the same time. Um, I exercise right when I wake up. I get into the office. I work my 12 to 14 hours. I eat throughout the day. I train at night. I go to bed. I do the same thing every day.
Yeah.
And
And
I know it sounds boring.
no, no, no.
But
It sounds like my life. So I get it. No argument on this side. I've said here recently that people say I don't get excited about anything because I just know the work that I need to do.
sure.
And I even think back to April of 2017, I actually tore my ACL, and that was like an interesting time for me because I had been going and going for all of my life at that point. So 27, tear my ACL playing flag football of all things, which I hate to admit, by the way. Tear my ACL at that point. So I sit down, and at that point in time, my surgery didn't go perfectly, right? And there was a blood clot that developed in my leg, so I got really worried. But I knew if I just sat in it, then I would be stuck and I wouldn't really do anything. But the world was going to move forward whether I liked it or not. So I got up and I just took action. I understand you have a pretty similar story to that. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, we're all going to face different levels of adversity. I unfortunately have had some major heart issues. I've suffered
Mm,
two heart attacks, and had some other heart things as well.
yeah,
And you have two choices: you can let it beat you, or you can keep moving forward and try and overcome it. And I chose to not let that beat me. I decided that if the universe was going to take me, they're going to have to come a lot harder than clogging an artery or
yeah,
two. So we all have choices. I've seen people that have been handicapped by adversity and they just can't face it. They can't overcome it. Some people can't get out of bed, but you have the ability to overcome anything you're presented. And I think we're all presented, like you were presented what you were presented for a reason.
right,
It was to teach you a lesson, and it was up to you how you were going to respond to that lesson and how you chose to move forward. And if you didn't do so successfully, the universe is going to do it again.
for sure.
So I think that in the wake of adversity, being able to ultimately try and overcome and move forward is going to define who you are as a man, and it ultimately defines your character.
What type of adversity is Brandon facing right now?
Oh, I face adversity of, different adversity in my personal life, different adversity running the different businesses I have, consistent. It's every day.
Yeah,
So adversity becomes it becomes part of your day and part of who you are, and when you get to a certain point, again, the character that you've created, because adversity and overcoming challenges ultimately create strength and character. It becomes just part of the process.
for sure. And to that end, I enjoy facing adversity because I know you don't grow if you're comfortable. So one of the things I share with people a lot is that I make a decision every day to choose my own suffering. For example, I used to tell myself I'm not a runner. I used to say that a lot. I hated running. I hate cardio. But I also know cardio is required out of me in order to lead a successful and healthy life. And also facing adversity is required out of me, and being uncomfortable is required out of me in order to grow, because there's no growth at all in comfort. And so I started telling myself, one, it's going to hurt, but it won't kill you. So whatever you have to do, you have to understand that regardless, it's going to hurt, but it won't kill you. So there was a point in my journey where I wake up. This was almost a year ago now. And I sat for a while thinking about what I wanted to do because life was just all over the place. And then I go to sleep, fall asleep, and then I wake up at 1:42 a.m. And this was September of last year. So I wake up at 1:42 and I'm like, you know what? I'm going to do a bike ride. And so the initial thought was I was going to do like a 3-month bike ride, but however, that's not realistic considering what I was doing for work. So I decided I was going to do a bike ride from San Francisco to LA. But the kicker was there was no training and I didn't have a bike. So I bought the bike the day of to ride 500 miles from San Francisco to LA because there was an adversity that I wanted to overcome and I wanted to see exactly what I can do, what I was capable of. So David Goggins talks about it a lot. He said one of the reasons why people struggle oftentimes after they've done something huge like a marathon, for example, is you haven't set up the next thing that you're going to do. So I continue to set up challenges for myself. I did like a 300 miles in May, and then following that, I was like, you know what? I'm going to do 75 hard. I'm on day 58 of 75 hard right now. So I'm constantly choosing my own suffering. So when you hear that, how does that compare to how you operate?
You know, I operate a little differently. I believe that everything in life is a mental exercise. And when you realize that your mind controls everything, nothing is ultimately that hard, right?
Mm-hmm.
So those things that we view as difficult, when you realize that you have the ability to do so much more than you think, nothing ultimately becomes that difficult. Now, do I hold myself to higher and higher standards every day? Yes. Am I going to go ride 500 miles on a bike just no, I'm not going to do that. That doesn't sound exciting to me. But everyone has their own journey. But ultimately, what I do is I set goals for myself, and then I'm constantly trying to elevate and increase those goals to push myself to higher and higher levels. My goals are more, fitness based and business based, but nothing like running 50 miles or doing that. That's not really what drives me. But for individuals like yourself, that's great because you're learning that you can now accomplish things that you didn't otherwise feel were attainable. And that's the whole point of this whole exercise.
For sure. And along those lines, people can, try to achieve a lot of things. But in order to get to a position like you're in right now, I mean, mentioned it earlier, you're responsible for, at least your group is responsible for over 1,500 transactions and $6.5 billion in sales. But you don't get there without facing adversity. What was a moment for you where maybe you were like, okay, this might be a little bit tougher than I thought?
I've never had that moment. Interestingly enough, like I mentored dozens and dozens and dozens of young men, and they all seem to have that moment. I've never sat down in front of someone and said, this is hard.
Yeah.
I've never made an excuse as to why I couldn't do something. I just did it.
I love it.
And if you're going to sit down and have those moments, there's a problem there usually.
Yeah. So how do you help people that you work with that maybe have those moments? Can you help me understand that?
Again, when people start, you ultimately, one of the most important things is belief in yourself.
For sure.
And maybe when I started and knew nothing, call me crazy, but I'd call the owner of a piece of property, and if they were going to sell and I've done nothing, I'm like, I'm the best person. That was just always my mindset.
Yep.
I try and help young people understand that they need to expand their mind and understand that things are going to be hard.
Yep.
Right? It's okay to be tired. It's okay to be hungry. It's okay not to be happy. It's okay to be unbalanced. And it's okay to put everything you have into one thing, and it's still going to be really hard, and you just have to keep doing it. And really the only people that fail are the people that quit. Because if you don't quit and you keep trying, at some point you're going to figure it out. But most people push the eject button way too early.
So what do you feel is something where maybe you had a moment with one of the guys that you support, one of the guys that you coach, one of the guys that you mentor? You looked at them and you knew they had something in them, but they just couldn't see it, but you were able to empower them to figure that out.
In our field, it's tough because it's highly competitive.
Yeah.
It takes a very unique skill set. There's just so many different things that go into it. I can do my best to instill confidence in individual. I can do my best to instill a skill set in individuals. But at the end of the day, if they don't have that self-belief, if they don't have that passion, if they don't have that desire, that's unteachable. Right? The one thing you can't teach another individual is passion. You can't teach them to have heart. You can't teach them to have desire. You can't teach that burning inside them. So if that doesn't exist, it's kind of difficult to continue to move forward in the wake of challenge and succeed at a high level.
So imagine I'm facing a challenge right now. I'm working with you. You've done everything that you possibly can to help me out. But you know that I also see in myself that I can do it, but I'm just struggling. What advice would you give me?
I would first try to understand why it is you think you're struggling and what challenges it is that you think you're having. And I'd like to understand, your thought process, because candidly, it's probably something that occurred within you in the past,
Yep.
maybe when you were younger, and there's a challenge or a roadblock or something that's causing you to not be able to proceed beyond. And I try to understand that and help you understand that, so together we can move forward. The only reason that someone might be having an issue might be something so deep ingrained in them from their past or what have you, that it's holding them back from their future.
Yeah.
And I would try to help them understand that so they could overcome these circumstances. A lot of times it's not just hard work, it's overcoming years and years of how we're mentally wired.
Yeah, for sure.
To now get past that issue, so then you can move forward.
Yeah. And from your experience, which I know you have a ton, what are some roadblocks that you typically see come up for people that they have created in their mind this fear around those roadblocks, but it's very easily to overcome?
A lot of people, like you going through what you went through with your knee, even though it probably was,
Yep.
it empowered you to grow and create and become better, and you probably became stronger because of that. A lot of people, and I mentor a lot of young people, they just haven't gone through life yet.
Yep.
So because of that, when you're hitting the jaw the first time, it's a shock to your system. And they have to understand that, hey, it's okay. It's okay to get kicked in the teeth, right?
Yep.
You don't have to give up and go crying and go run home because you got kicked in the teeth the first time. It's just experience. It's just understanding that things are going to be hard. We live in this world where you go on the internet, you see all these people in these fancy houses with these fancy cars, and we have all these expectations of how everyone else is doing things, and you run into a roadblock. Well, no one else is doing that. No one else is having these challenges, and they get knocked back.
Yep.
You have to understand that it's okay. Like, you're allowed to have a challenge. You're allowed to be feeling uneasy, but you can keep it moving forward, and it's just your mind overcoming that.
How does one overcome every day when you got a lot of stuff on your plate and you feel like life has been so hard, so difficult for you, and it just feels like you? How does one overcome it?
It's hard. You just got to do it.
Yeah.
There's no secret recipe. It comes from within you, right? Why was Michael Jordan the greatest basketball player ever? And obviously that's a unique example, but there was something within him that pushed him to become the player that he was. I don't have the perfect answer, and it's not going to sit well, but you just kind of have to do it, right? You can sit and make excuses. You can sit and cry and say, woe is me, why can't I? Or you can just do it, and you can just continue to push yourself, knowing that you're trying to do something and you're not going to give up until that something is accomplished.
So one of the fun questions I like to ask is, you look at yourself, let's say 40 years from now.
I'm dead for
let's say
maybe 10 years.
Let's say 20 years.
Okay.
You look at yourself 20 years from now. What is Brandon accomplished?
At this point, I want to look back and say, okay, I was able to help others achieve things that they didn't think possible. I want to look back and have some sort of legacy that I created something that was beneficial to others, right? We all start our career and we're so focused on ourselves and how much money are we going to make and all the things we want, materialistic things. At some point, I want to create, I think, a legacy that I can look back and say, well, I actually made a difference in people's lives.
Yeah. So what's a question that I haven't asked you that you maybe want to talk a little bit more about?
Well, first, I think you're doing a really good job with the questions. Yeah, I'll give you an interesting story. So I train religiously. I've trained religiously for the last, almost 30 years. And unfortunately, at the beginning of this year, I had to take about 4 months off. Had some health issues, had to take 4 months off. Got back into the gym. I think I was back in the gym for about 3 weeks and tore my lat. Right. Oh, wow. So I tore my lat. I went black and blue from my lat all the way up through my elbow, all the way down to my wrist. I'm looking in the mirror. I'm like, oh shit, I'm going to have surgery. I just got back in the gym. I'm just
getting in the flow.
Just getting just barely, right?
Yeah.
After 4 months off, and I'm like, I can't let this injury beat me. And lucky enough, it didn't require surgery. So what I did, which is a really great case study for those, if you ever tear a muscle that's not fully torn, I tore my lat on a Friday. That Monday I was back in the gym. and I was back in the gym working that muscle through excruciating pain. Literally, if you can imagine, like, let's say I'll do a dumbbell row with a 100-pound dumbbell, 10 pounds. And I'm just like moving that weight because the muscle's torn through that 10-pound movement. And I don't know many people that would do this, but I would literally show up to the gym every night and I do my 3 sets of 25 reps of 10 pounds. And it would hurt, and everyone was looking at me like, what is this guy's a weirdo? He's doing 10 pounds and he's grunting, right? And so I'm working through that for 7 days. I'm like, oh, wow, it's starting to feel better. And I start to move a little bit more weight. And I never stopped. 2 weeks later of consistently going into the gym and literally for just 10 or 15 minutes to show up and work that particular muscle, within 2 weeks, I was back to full training on that muscle and my whole body. So what would take, if you tear your lat, it's usually you're out for 6 months plus. I was back in 2 weeks and now pretty much back up to full speed by just not willing to allow that injury to tell me that I could no longer continue to train and move forward.
So Brandon, a lot of people don't understand the power of facing that kind of pain and still being able to work through that. But I also believe that application of being willing to do something like that applies in different areas of your life. How do you make that move from taking that pain in the gym and carry that over to everything else that you do?
That's a great question. When I was going through that process, and looking back, that was nothing in comparison to some other things I've been through.
Yeah.
But I'm like, wow, I don't know many people, especially at my age, that would go to the gym and work they would just sit on the couch. They would just say, okay, I will allow this injury to heal. So right then and there, I knew, okay, I'm a little crazy, but it carries over to my day-to-day business.
Yep.
And that is why when I'm putting out a presentation for a client, I know that I'm different in a sense because I'm willing to do so much more than the average individual. And if you're willing to do one thing in one field of one aspect of your life, you're willing to do it in every aspect of your life. So only what I'm saying is who you are in one aspect is who you are in every aspect. And if you're one way this way, it's going to carry over to everything else you do. And that ties back to being disciplined, what we talked about right at the very beginning of this conversation. I want people to understand that you become successful by being a certain type of an individual, and it carries over. It's not that you just become successful and then you start to get fit.
Yeah.
Or and then you start to do certain things. It's who you are as an individual carries over to everything you do in your life and how you do it, right? Because when I walk into the gym versus and everyone, I know that I'm going to train hard. I know that I'm going to push myself harder than 99% of the people in that gym. Well, that carries over into the business world, right?
Yep.
My competition, I know they don't do the things that I do. They're not willing to do the things that I do. They're not willing to wake up in the morning or stay late or do that, be as detail oriented. Everything carries over. It's who you are as an individual that creates everything that you ultimately have.
Well, I don't plan to tear my lat, but if I do, I know who to call.
There's most days, and I'm sure you're the same way, most days I'm not very motivated, especially after doing something for 25 years.
Yeah.
There's a lot of days I don't want to go to work. There's a lot of days I don't want to go into the gym. You'll learn when you get a little older and you go in the gym, it hurts a lot. And it's not as fun when you're in constant pain, but it's the discipline of knowing you have to do certain things that continues to allow you to move forward when you don't want to do things. And that's motivation. Everyone is motivation. Motivation is fleeting. It's bullshit. Discipline, knowing that, okay, I have to eat these foods today, or I have to do this. Like you said, I don't like to do cardio. I have to do I hate cardio. Yeah. I do it every single day, not because I want to, because I have to. I lift weights not every day, but 5 times a week. Heavy weights because I know I have to in order to move forward. I go to work 12, 14. I don't even have to go to work, but I know in order for me to accomplish my goals, I have to continue to push myself. It's the discipline that most people don't have that continue to allow them to move forward, because motivation comes and goes.
Yep.
Right. I could be motivated for one day. I was not motivated this morning. I still woke up.
Same.
But it's the discipline that keeps you to move forward, keeps you moving forward. And there's a huge difference. Everyone's motivated at some point.
So one of the things that my mentor shared with me, he used to always say discipline equals freedom. And I truly believe that, because once you put systems in place, it allows you to have the type of freedom financially. It allows you to have the type of freedom to really do the things that you desire to do. Because all the things that you want are behind discipline. They're on the other side of fear. And we can create all of these imaginary things and tell ourselves these things about ourselves that really aren't even true, but we haven't tried. But discipline is how you get to those things. What are some of the things that you probably wouldn't have achieved if you didn't have the discipline?
I wouldn't have achieved anything without discipline. I mean, the reality is, discipline, it it makes you feel like you probably feel like you do the same thing every day, almost like you're in this box, right? But that discipline allows you, on the other side, like you said, complete freedom. You get those that are disciplined achieve higher financial success, which gives you ultimately more freedom. But those people are so regimented that the outsider might look at them and say, "Wow, that looks like a very regimented, almost maybe I'm in jail type of a lifestyle." But it is complete freedom, right? Because I get to do things if I wanted to that most other people don't have the opportunity to do, and it's because of that discipline.
Now, I'm going to ask you a question that I probably wouldn't be able to answer myself, just knowing what people think about me and how I am. What are you working on that you're excited about?
I'm working on building my investment portfolio.
Yeah.
And I'm excited about that. I'm excited because I think there might be some opportunity coming. So I'm excited to grow that side of my business. So that is exciting to me.
And last thing, where can people find Brandon Michaels?
On Instagram at the Brandon Michaels. You go to brandonmichaelsgroup.com. Type in my name, you'll find me.
Fair enough. Well, Brandon, I appreciate you, man. It's been a pleasure, like, having this conversation with you, which I'm sure we'll continue to talk. But I believe that from what you're doing, if you're watching this episode, if you're listening to this episode, and you're thinking about understanding what discipline looks like, you got a great example right here. And as I say every week, discipline equals freedom. And while manhood may not look the same for everyone, the core values of resilience, authenticity, and integrity remain universal. We are the Disciplined Man, and this is what real men think. Brandon, appreciate you.
Thanks for having me.